Welcome to What We Watch When We Drink, a Booze Dancing Entertainment Network podcast featuring lively discussions about movies, TV shows, and anything else that we're watching while we drink our favorite boozy beverages. If you enjoy this show, please subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, Audible, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. You can also find us on boozdancing.com, and if you have any questions, comments, show or drink suggestions, email us at boozdancing@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. André!
We are live. It's cocktail, not a whiskey Wednesday. It's a cocktail Wednesday, correct? It is
Cocktail
it is
Wednesday for
It is
sure.
Wednesday, right? It's Wednesday somewhere.
Still.
That's right. Still, this is
All day.
This is the Booze Dancing Entertainment Network. We are doing our famous live stream on a Wednesday. What we watch when we drink. We're live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, the Moon. Where else? Instagram. Where else we're live?
Instagram.
Everywhere. We are on Twitter or X, whatever it's called. I think we're there too, right?
Yes, we are on X.
And we have a return guest, one of our favorite people in the whole wide world. André Darlington is here, best-selling author of, I was going to say 12, but I think it's more than 12, cocktail books. Is it 12?
12.
Oh, wow. 12 books.
12.
Wow.
The Booze and Vinyl books,
It's a baker's dozen.
Bar Menu, Gotham City Cocktails, the John Wayne Cocktail Book, Brews Cruise. I don't know how many. What am I missing? There's so many. And we're going to talk about two tonight.
Lebowski.
Oh, yes. That's the Lebowski book. That was fun. We are going to talk about two new ones tonight. But before we get into that, we got to say hello to André. Hi, André.
Hi, thanks for having me on. It's good to see you guys.
It's great.
In the great conflagration we can call Forbidden Cowboy.
That's right.
Forbidden Cowboy.
I love the hat. So you've been out and about promoting these books or book? Are you doing one or two promoting tours at the same time?
So Cowboy came out in March, I want to say. So it was out first. But the way these things work is that nobody quite wakes up in March. And cocktails there's like two seasons in cocktails, right? Spring and fall, basically. And then there's like summer cocktails and there's winter cocktails. But really a huge amount of cocktail interest in spring when we're all coming out of our houses and the weather gets nice. But it's still cool enough to be in our backyards and there aren't mosquitoes. And then, which we're just kind of heading out of now, and then fall. So they came out in March, but I had a couple of events. So Forbidden just came out. And what was crazy this year is I launched Forbidden in New York, and then immediately went to LA where I hadn't had any live events yet. And I went immediately to LA and launched at the Autry out there. So super fun. In theory, they should be totally different audiences. But of course, nothing works out that way, and the audiences are fairly similar because we're in this like moment of Cowboy with Beyonce's album out and Taylor Swift having done country. I don't know. There's a thing. Yellowstone's on. Kevin Costner's in the news. It's just like a lot of country cowboy action right now.
Really true. I didn't think about that. There is a kind of a country or cowboys are having their moment after 100 years or 50 years.
They really are.
You think it's Yellowstone that did it? You think like maybe Yellowstone or that whole thing?
I think that really helps. I mean, it's sort of like a Mad Men of that genre. You know what I mean? I mean, people I think have really watched a lot of episodes. I've seen a couple of seasons. I haven't seen the whole thing. But also I think just, we had the Fast Car win at the Grammys. There's just a lot of like country cowboy stuff going on. And I don't know. And then Kevin Costner with his big series, his TV series was at Cannes. So it just seems like while I was on tour for this in the last couple of months, it's like, oh, we're in a cowboy moment. This is crazy.
It's really weird.
Super cool.
And you hadn't planned that, whenever you started writing the book, I'm sure, right?
Not planned that. I had not planned that. I mean, maybe the people that were like wanting, this was on Quarto. This is the same group that I did Big Lebowski with last year, and they came back and said, "Hey, do you want to do a cowboy book?" And I had already done the John Wayne book. So strangely, my name's André. I have like round glasses, and yet here I am writing books. I might be the only person with a French first name writing cowboy books. I don't know.
Louis L'Amour.
Maybe.
So
But yeah, I'm wearing my hat that I did a research trip to San Antonio, so I'm wearing a great cowboy hat from Paris Hatters in
nice hat.
San Antonio. They opened in 1917, which
Wow.
is actually a little past the cowboy era, but super fun.
Wasn't there a little? Was it? Yeah, I think it's in the book about Stetson. That Stetson's like this super old company, hat making company.
Yeah,
Like I was
they were
kind of
made in,
stunned how old they were.
super old, and in fact there's a huge block off Washington Square in Philadelphia
Yeah.
that were those factories.
Right.
It's right up by Independence Hall, and I remember them being these factory lofts, and then I started this book and I was like, that's the factory. It was this huge city block that just made Stetsons. It's crazy.
Well,
crazy.
it's one of those companies where when you say Stetson, you know what you're thinking
It's a
about.
cowboy hat company.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
interesting.
There's so many cool, weird details in this book that I just loved. I did not expect that really going in. I'd done that book for John Wayne, so I was in this genre, but that's very like, let's talk about all of Wayne's movies and it was much more like inspired by stuff. And this one, I really wanted to see what were people drinking on the range after the Civil War. So the cowboy era is actually quite short. It starts after the Civil War and goes up basically to the beginning of the 20th century. So by like 1890 something, we have start having the range wars and the cowboys sort of over. So many settlers were coming west and putting up barbed wire that it was unfeasible to run cattle from Texas up to Montana anymore. So we have a very short period of time. And this book is just chock full of things I did not expect. One is that these guys and gals that were, in the saloons were drinking way better booze than I think we think they were. And they had a bigger sweet tooth than we think cowboys had, because sugar was money, right? If you got money, you wanted sugar. Sugar was rare. Anyway, so ended up being a super fun book and a much deeper dive than I think, certainly I thought coming into it.
Well, before we get too deep, let's start with a cocktail. Now, the assignment was you're going to each make a couple cocktails for this evening. Ange, did you make one from the cowboy book?
I did. And
There's nothing like a cowboy with a Philly accent.
I went with Jack of Diamonds.
What did you make?
Jack of Diamonds. That's a great
Jack of Diamonds, because A, it was simple. B, I had everything on hand. And C, I mean, come on, cherries. Yeah. Got to put the cherries. Now, is it okay that I use the good Luxardos?
Yeah, in fact, those Luxardos, I talk about it somewhere in the book. The Luxardos came over, I want to say, in the 1860s to 80s, or something in there. So they've been around for a very long time, and we're definitely out on the frontier because there's mention of them and mention of, basically like once these young cowboys got money, they went into town and they wanted stuff like a maraschino cherry because it was exotic. Just the same reason we do. It's exotic, delicious, and it tastes great.
André, did you make a cocktail? You have something?
I did. I actually made the I'm Your Huckleberry.
Ooh, what was that one?
Oh,
pretty
fun one.
I saw that.
One of the things that was funny is I wanted to pay homage. I didn't want people to pick up this cowboy book and be like, there's not, so many people know the lore and they don't know the historical part. So I'm like, I'll do a cocktail for Tombstone, something about Tombstone. Everybody knows Tombstone. And then I thought, I started watching that movie, which of course is awesome. And in the research, it turns out that he actually said those lines in real life. He says, I'm your Huckleberry, which was kind of a cowboy slang for saying, I'm the man for the job. You want to fight? I'm your Huckleberry. And he actually said it, and then they had their little shootout. Anyway, you can get huckleberry syrup. Tarani, the company, if you go into a coffee shop,
they
make a really good huckleberry syrup. And huckleberries would have been something that cowboys would have foraged for along the trail. They didn't bring a lot of fun stuff with them in their truck wagons. But sometimes they'd run into bees and they'd find honey. A lot of times they found wild onions, which prevented them from getting scurvy. That's where they got their vitamin C. And then they would run into huckleberries, and there's records of them kind of picking huckleberries as, they're following the cattle herd.
Wow.
So fun drink with a fun story that actually has a basis in history. But also we all know the Val Kilmer line.
So
my neighbor says it all the time whenever we're going to start drinking. It's like, I'm your Huckleberry.
Besides huckleberry syrup, what is in that drink?
It is whiskey, huckleberry syrup, lemon juice, and Angostura bitters.
Okay, that's a good combo.
Mm-mm-mm.
And what's in that?
So it's a little bit like a whiskey huckleberry sour kind of thing going on. It's nicely balanced. It's gonna be, it's a little bit in between like a whiskey sour, but it's a little bit on the sweeter side. So it's almost like a sidecar zone, I would say a little bit.
Yep.
Ooh, I like a sidecar.
Yeah, instead of the orange, it's the huckleberry in there. It's a fun drink.
And what's in it?
Nice.
What are the ingredients in yours?
This one is as easy as it gets if you have everything. So 2.5 ounces of rye. I use Knob Creek.
Nice.
Half ounce of Luxardo Maraschino liqueur. There is no substitute. And a couple of maraschino cherries. A couple of Luxardo cherries to go with it.
Oh, good. I made the Dead or Alive. Can we see that?
Oh, I love it.
Oh,
you did. That's awesome.
Good.
So you muddle.
What's in it?
You muddle olives, correct? And then you muddle the olives.
You muddle olives?
You muddle. I've never muddled an olive. That was a weird experiment.
It's
briny. I'm scenting briny. Go ahead, continue. I'm sorry.
Add whiskey, which was I think I used. It was bourbon. I think I used Basil Hayden's. Prune juice, simple syrup, bitters, and ice. You stir, strain, and garnish with more olives. So,
and verdict?
We'll find out here in a second.
Oh,
I am intrigued.
So this
it'll get you it'll get you drunk, and it'll keep you regular.
That's right. Oh, exactly. That's really interesting. Wow, it's really interesting with the sweetness of the prune juice and the pickliness of the saltiness, the brininess of the olives. That's really good.
Yes.
That's really good.
So, reading back into the record, whiskey, we didn't have any laws. And the closer to the range and the closer you got to the money, the more adulterated basically a lot of this booze was. And there's a lot of prune juice going around to fill in. There's like prune juice and gunpowder and glycerin and cayenne pepper. They were just throwing everything they could into probably what was originally whiskey, and then they would just add to it. But there was a number of prune or plum recipes. Plum would have been really readily available, or prune juice, which was popular. It's a very medicinal. They use prune juice for medicinal reasons. We think of it as for digestion and keeping you regular and all that. But they used it for a lot of reasons, a lot of intestinal stuff. So like Dr. Pepper is still base of prune juice. But all this stuff kind of comes out of this 19th century. I worked on that drink for a long time because I wanted to it's probably the weirdest drink in the book. And definitely. I had been playing with an olive and prune juice for a long time because I had seen some old medicinal recipes that had that. There are cocktails that have that in there. And I started to play with it, and it is delicious because it's salty, but a little bit salty and stone fruit, but stewed fruit. So I hope you love it. That's one of my favorite ones in the book because it's just so
it is weird.
And I'm intrigued.
It weirdly
totally
works.
Intrigued.
I mean, I think I need to play with the ratio a little bit, but for my palate.
Yeah, you kind of got to get it where you like it. If too much salt or not enough salt or whatever.
It's really interesting, and it's weird. I haven't had prune juice in eons, and so it's kind of a wow. That's cool. So let's step back a bit. So what was obviously the higher ups came to you and said, "Hey, want to write a book about cowboys?" Right? Did you have a love for cowboys and cowboy movies and cowboy stuff when you were a kid, or is this like cowboys? I don't know anything about cowboys. What do I know about cowboys?
A little bit of both. I mean, I do love cowboys as a genre. I mean, I grew up watching the Clint Eastwoods. I grew up watching Bonanza. I mean, I think it's just such an part of American culture. And I had gotten into the myth of it all doing the John Wayne book. But again, what was interesting to me is this time I was like, I'm going to actually go back to the historical record and find out what I can find out, because I can always kind of do, inspired by this and that and the other thing. But I really wanted to know. And this book ended up being this like crazy deep dive. It's one of the few books that I have that has a bibliography in the back. I read 50 to 100 books for this thing, just going through, from Teddy Roosevelt's biography to So many books on saloons or the beginning of, the end of the Civil War. So there's just a lot, the gold rush, there's just a lot of interesting things going on. And I use it as an opportunity to teach myself sort of about this, I would say, really pivotal moment in American history. So, looking back on it, there's a lot of cowboy mythology, but what really happened in economic terms is this was a commodity bubble, right? So cattle, beef was the commodity bubble. It's the first big industrial product that the United States made in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. And you go all the way from Goodnight Lovin', who are the guys from Lonesome Dove, taking that first herd up north, to these steaks going to Delmonico's on the East Coast. But it became this huge Wall Street bubble where all the wealthy were investing in the West, and there's a lot of London bakers that were investing in the West. Teddy Roosevelt went out West. He had a farm too. So this was just very, Hollywood embellished it all, but it really was like this crazy moment in American history where everyone went cattle crazy and they went steak crazy. And it was super fascinating to read about these cowboys who were in general young soldiers, sort of lost after the Civil War. They went out West with their gun and their bedroll after the disbanding of both armies, although typically they were the Southern soldiers. And, as we know of the South, once the war was kind of ended, they just kind of wandered off, not knowing quite what to do. And they ended up out West doing these really dangerous jobs. And so it was like a mix of like love of the lore and then kind of getting into like, ooh, this was what was actually happening though. And I think from a cocktailer's point of view, right, after the Civil War is the golden era of cocktails. So we get, that's when you get your Jerry Thomas, right, in the late 19th century. But we think about that time from the fancy hotels on the East Coast. But Jerry started out in the gold rush era in San Francisco, went through New Orleans, and then ended up in New York, So it was really interesting to see this story from the frontier side. And what happened was, yes, there were these hotels in the Gilded Age, all this money is being made, but a lot of that liquor was making it to the trailheads. So cities like Oglala, certainly Kansas City, places in Wyoming like Deadwood, the record has lots of champagne, chartreuse, great whiskeys, great cognacs, all this stuff that, we think that our perception is cowboys walked into a bar covered in mud, ordered a whiskey neat. That's it. No ice, nothing. That's it. That's what we think of a cowboy. And it turns out not to be true. Sure, they did that as well. But when they took all those cattle up, they were making more money than we could possibly imagine for somebody who made no money last month, So suddenly they were rich. And what does any rich boy want to do? I want to try some champagne, I want to try chartreuse. And added to this were all these dandies that we think of too on, Doc Holliday, Billy the Kid, even, the Earps to a certain extent, but all, these guys that, they had fancy engraving on their guns and they wore great clothes and they knew how to drink. So that was a really interesting part of this book, that it was kind of this discovery that, not that many cocktail writers have gone out to the West to see what happened out there. And of course, we rely a lot on print media to know what happened back then. And, the print is scarce. So you're looking at journals, you're looking at cowboy. I mean, I didn't look at a lot of cocktail history. I looked at a lot of saloon history, a lot of like history of the sheriffs, a history of some of these cowboy outfits, to kind of get, praying that I would read along and all of a sudden they'd mention a drink or something,
Never happened, huh?
So there was, and they did quite a bit. They did mention it quite a bit. So it was a fun project. I feel like I joke that I'm in my like historical my historical fantasy or historical era, where, all the drinks in here are pretty much period ingredients. And I kind of talk about in each one of the head notes, yeah, this is kind of a fun thing, but here's a drink that could have been what they were drinking. And then there are a couple instances in the book of drinks that, there's the drink called the Yellow Daisy that ended up in the Savoy Cocktail Book in 1930. It was supposedly Deadwood Dick's drink. And after looking through all these drinks from this era, 1860s really to 1890s, that Deadwood Dick drink rings true. And what's fascinating is, 1930 is not that far removed from 1897 or something, like some of these range situations, So if you were in your 20s or teens as a cowboy, you were still around and in your 50s in the 30s. It's crazy, kind of to think. So there was a lot of that cowboy stuff that went up into the 20th century. But so I did find like the rattlesnake is another famous cocktail that really reads like a cowboy drink. Anyway, there's
it seems
a lot going on out on
like
the range.
Alcohol and spirits, and probably beer and wine as well, are like any other commodity. Everyone's moving west, and they need supplies. They need shovels. They need whatever you need to work to raise cattle or to build a house or a cabin or whatever. And the East gets smart, and the industrialists of the time, and somebody says, "Hey, we need a store in Deadwood, or we need a store to supply all these guys coming out here for a gold rush, or for creating a farm, or for building a house." So all these things, and just alcohol is just one more thing, and it comes west to all these different points along in the country, and the ingenious American spirit takes these things and makes something better, right? They make a farm, they make a cabin, they make a cocktail. And I think this is just another example of the American spirit of taking, you need something, you get it, you create something better, you create something new. And this is the birth of the cocktail, right? This is the birth of, and all the bourbon's coming probably from Kentucky, and all the ryes are coming from Maryland and Pennsylvania, right? And Virginia, and they're all just moving west. It takes a long time, though, interestingly, for distilleries to come out west. Probably there's breweries, I'm sure. There's probably people making beer in their, farmhouses and barns. But distilling is not a thing. But all those things are coming west to all these saloons that are opening them up, and hotels and restaurants. So it's really, I think the cowboy spirit really is quite the push, the inertia for a lot of what we have today, right? In alcohol.
Absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right. I did, I knew more about what cocktails were doing kind of when the settlers first came to the East Coast. And it really is a matter of pragmatism, right? You end up with, persimmon beer,
whatever you have,
stuff like huckleberry and stuff, because it's pragmatic and that's what you have. And you distill any fruit, you distilled anything you could get your hands on, right. And because stuff coming from the old world was really expensive. So you're absolutely right. That same spirit just started to roll across the country. There was some distilling that was fascinating to find. And they were famous for it. So for instance, there was it was kind of a rot gut whiskey that came out of Taos. They called it Taos Tanglefoot, or you'll see it in the record. He apparently died in some kind of, I think it was an Indian attack or something. So you get these guys who are kind of these like lone wolf, like I'm going way out, hundreds of miles out past the border frontier, and I'm going to start distilling there. And then people are going to make their way and I'm going to get rich. And they did get rich. And then there was some distilling along the border. So there was like more mezcal and tequila than we probably ever thought, So if you're on that San Antonio line, certainly, or if you're like west of the Pecos there, they had what they called cactus wine, which was basically mezcal and peyote together.
Wow.
So you can imagine those bars, right? You thought this bar in Star Wars was weird. Wait till you walk in and everyone's on mezcal.
Hello. Jeez.
So there was some distilling, but again, right? That's what they had. So you're making wine out of like, agave, you're making tequila out of, you're using whatever you can, there's a lot of the stuff in the record of, and these boys that are coming out of the Civil War in the South, they probably were some moonshiners,
Sure.
Some of them probably knew how to moonshine, and whatnot because their parents did.
I think it's also
but
true.
yeah,
It's also true of all the food,
yeah.
right? And the food's the same way. If you look at old
Yeah.
cookbooks from that era, or from the 1800s, early 1900s, right? You look at it now, you go, "What the hell were they thinking?" But they're using what they have,
Yeah.
right? Whether it's
Yeah.
animal or vegetable or whatever, they are using what they have. They don't have a grocery store like we have today. They would use what the land gives them.
It's either
Yeah,
that
it
or
was-
starve,
That's
right?
right.
Yeah, you starve. I mean, this was actually really fun to do the food in this book. I love some of the food that I found for this book. You know, Cowboy cooking is cast iron cooking. They had these cast irons. The original, the wagons were Civil War issued Studebakers that had been retrofitted to take the food and the bedrolls along. They didn't have eggs. They didn't have sugar. They pretty much didn't have butter. So these were things that, again, when they went into town, when we think of kind of an Americana thing, if we think of like apple pie, it's because, I have a great recipe for dried apple pie. So they dry the apples and bring it on the trail, and then they'd reconstitute the apples and make pie out of it. I mean, mostly in the cities, you couldn't even get apples. You forget about getting apples out on the trail. But so when they stopped and they went into town, they wanted sweet things like maraschino cherries, which we were talking about, but they also craved like apple pie, because it's butter, eggs, sugar. One of the things that I thought was really fascinating, which really started to change my mind about cowboys and what their tastes were, is that again and again and again, there's an obsession with going into town and having oysters. And I thought, how are these guys? We're scared about having oysters in Illinois or like Southern Indiana now.
Oh my God.
And these guys are having oysters in the mountains in Colorado, because the train brought them in on like ice and hay, and that was the luxury. That was the luxury thing because they had so much money. Again, as you were saying, the enterprising folks in the East were just like, let's stick a box of oysters and send it west and keep it as cool as possible and see how much money we can make. And it turns out everyone could make a lot of money on these cowboys. So then, when I read stuff like that, I was like, if they're eating oysters, they're having martinis with them, they're having chartreuse and champagne with them. I mean, all bets are off. This is fancy.
It's really interesting to think that there's saloons of that time who they're getting this product in. They don't know what it is, probably in some cases, but some guy is sending it from Philadelphia in the 1880s, and this looks like it's fancy. Look at the bottle. We'll buy a couple bottles to see if it works, and then you're serving it to these cowboys who, hey, we can make something with this. This is good, right? That's how it starts.
Yeah, they were sending, the finished hats out. The hats were coming from Philadelphia. Anything that was manufactured, the saddles were coming from the cities. The cities actually made the saddles. I think Philly made some of the saddles, and saddles were wildly expensive back in the day. They were like buying a car when you bought your saddle. And then beef was going back the other way. It was this crazy, we have a raw material basically going east, and then in that classic exchange between raw materials and finished goods, things were coming from the east out to the frontier that they needed. Again, like things to make houses, nails. I mean, this was a construction boom too. Right. These towns would go from just dirt tents. So the original bars, which I saw some photos of this, and it's really fun. The original bars were basically wagons that somebody would paint saloon on. Half the time, it's not spelled correctly, so it'd be like salon on there, or like 3 O's. I mean, the spelling was just like totally optional. It was like wagon by the side of the railroad and just say saloon. You're like, what the heck are they? And you'd go in and sit in this wagon to get out of the sun and drink whatever hooch was in there, pay your however much, clamber back out onto your horse and keep going. I mean, just like that was the bar. Did
you find?
And then of course,
did you find any in books cocktail menus from that era? From those kinds of before you get to the bars,
the cities
before you get to the bar business, the pre-bar, like the guy in the stagecoach. Are there any kind of written menus out there?
There would be like a sign. It would basically say like beer. So one of the things that I thought was fascinating was going back to some sort of like primal thing that you see these cultures do. Whiskey, another name for whiskey was actually snakehead. So the idea was
Really?
that when you were selling your whiskey, you wanted it to be like really manly, strong. It's going to F you up. You know, if you're going to give your money to this, it's going to be really strong stuff. So it was called Snakehead. And a lot of people knew it as Snakehead because the bars would just have jars of whiskey with literally rattlesnakes in there to indicate that this was the really, the really good stuff,
Wow.
kind of like Let's Call
Yeah.
with the Worm.
Marketing. It's all marketing.
So yes, you'd see like a sign for like Snakehead, and that was just to indicate that they had some crazy good in theory whiskey there.
So what were the
and you see that still today in cultures.
what were the common? Was there a through line of cocktail that you'd see in most places, like an old fashioned, for instance? That seems like a pretty generic drink now. Was that a kind of, or was it whiskey and water? What was the thing that kind of connected them all early on, or throughout the West?
It seems to be spirit forward because getting the citrus was always kind of an issue, I think, except, really along the border where they were pulling like limes up, but they're, again, they're like limons, right? They're like not limes, not lemons, our modern limes and lemons divided at some point, but they're kind of these limons. So you see some of that. When it starts to stabilize, it turns into stuff like whiskey sours. Because it's got egg, which is something that was really rare on the road. And it was protein, so you're getting caloric intake. Also, it was frothy, so it had this sort of milkshakey thing going on. And it's funny because whiskey sours still kind of like, if you go west of Des Moines, I feel like in Iowa, you hit this like whiskey sour zone until you get to Denver. Having traveled out there quite a bit, and it's interesting because it's like, oh, this whiskey sour is like very old drink in this area. Not rich, So, and I've always wondered about this because like Wisconsin grew sugar beets, so they had a lot of sugar. But I think further down, I like anything, sugar just kept getting more and more expensive the further you get away from where it was produced. So that's why they did love these like maraschino cherries and stuff like that. But yeah, you start to see sours, I would say, as just like I can only imagine that they're thirst quenching too. So it was interesting. You see less of like the Manhattans out in the West, it seemed to me, and more like whiskey, and it's always going to be whiskey and stuff. Although they drink a shocking amount of gin, and there was a lot of Old Tom gin, because this was kind of the era of Old Tom. There was still a lot of Old Tom coming in, and Old Tom. For people that don't know, Old Tom is a little bit sweeter. It was replaced by London Dry once that really started getting manufactured, but Old Tom was in a lot of the recipes. Sort of between Geneva and gin is Old Tom, which is a little sugary. And again, the Cowboys loved sugar. So you get these sweeter drinks. I say right in the beginning of the book, you can dial back the sugar in these, but these are pretty accurate, that these are a little bit sweeter than I think certainly like veteran cocktail people would maybe drink for themselves. I mean, I know that I don't love sweet drinks, and I've cut sugar way back. I think a lot of people, as you develop your palate in cocktails, you end up being a little bit more bitter, a little less sugar. But these drinks are fairly sweet, and they're balanced. But it's just to indicate that they like the sweet stuff. I mean, the 19th century just had a real sweet.
If in your travels around, just in general, in the West, have you seen bars that have that kind of try to be cowboy focused, trying to recreate some of these older style drinks?
Yeah, not as many as I would like. We're more into the myth, I think, of it. I think there's a really there's a really difficult way. It's like there's a real hurdle there between all of the myth that was fed to us from Hollywood and in books.
It's hard to chop away from.
And what really happened. I know we're undergoing in this cowboy resurgence that we were talking about a little bit. We're certainly going through a reckoning that, there were a lot of black cowboys. And many of the black cowboys were the best cowboys because they were black and given the worst jobs, which were breaking horses. And breaking horses makes you a goddamn good cowboy, right?
And strong.
So there's like now like Nat Love is a very famous cowboy. I think we'll probably at some point. I hope Denzel Washington doesn't get too old before he can do the story of Nat Love. Yeah, there was a lot of black cowboys. So it's things like that we have this image of what Hollywood image of what cowboys were like, and then on the ground it was similar but quite different. I mean, the interesting thing is they did have sort of like a code of conduct. I think some of the positive things that we think of about the cowboy are true. Certainly a wry sense of humor. I mean, the books, the original, sort of the original sources are funny. Cowboys called cemeteries bone orchards, or there was a place in Deadwood called Boot Hill because that's where all the boots were when everybody died. Like really gallows humor because it was such dangerous work. But I think there's still going to be there's a lot to look at in there of what actually happened and what people were drinking. And I think in the American psyche, I think we think of this manliness that was like, I just want this whiskey neat, this real, a double, give me a whole bottle. And when in fact there was a lot of like, I'm rich tonight, so I do kind of want a daisy.
I think you're right. The mythology is really hard to get past for most people. We only know cowboys from TV and movies and cartoons and advertising, but the reality was very, very different. Did you come away from researching and creating these cocktails with a favorite style of cowboy cocktail?
Hard to say. Again, with all my books, I want to make sure that if this is somebody's first cocktail book, I've got them covered for some of the major styles. I will say that personally on this book, for whatever reason, both the editing part on the back end was a pure joy, and also testing these. I did this again with my friend and colleague Kevin Lundell in Philly. He flew down, and I basically write the drinks on paper, and then we go through them all and workshop them like we would open a restaurant kind of thing. We got to make these good. Are they book good? Are they good for this type of person? Are they good for this head note and that kind of stuff? So we really do a lot of work. And I don't know if it's just that I've done so many at this point or something magical clicked, but these are really some of my favorite drinks, which again, just shocked the hell out of me, because I'm much more, look at my glasses and my name, I'm much more like comfortable in a dark New York bar, LA bar, than I am, not more comfortable, but stylistically, we think of cocktails as being urban anyway, right? Cocktails are urban. Drinking liquor neat is rural. That's just kind of the global divide in general. So what shocked the hell out of me is that I loved these cocktails and they just came out one after another, kind of some hits, So every one of my books, we go through, we go through these drinks and we're like, yeah, we're getting these drinks. So they're really good. We'd feel good about having them on a restaurant menu, blah, blah. And then, a handful of them are like, wow, that's kind of a hit. And this book was kind of crazy where, Kevin flies down and it's like drink after drink. We don't even need edits and it just goes. And some of it is I was being a little more simple, they're cowboy drinks. So I did want to keep them simple. But yeah, as far as style wise, I love some of the American flavors like huckleberry, which have died out. But, why, if you go to Denver, there should be huckleberry drinks there. You know what I mean? So there's some of that, some going on for sure.
And what you got?
So one thing, speaking of huckleberries, if you're in Idaho, near Yellowstone? No, not Yellowstone. Yeah, Yellowstone. There's a cafe. I can't remember the name of it. It's like right outside the northern gate. They make a huckleberry shake. Delicious.
There you go.
My question is, with the chapters, the coffin varnish, the joy juice, is that what they were? Is that kind of your thing, or is that what they were kind of, referred to as?
Yeah, I'm playing on all these hilarious. So again, going back to the source material, the cowboys are just funny, and I really kind of named it those things. Those were all sort of euphemisms for liquor, for hard drink.
Okay.
Frontier Scamper Juice. I mean, the names go on and on, just like, coffin varnish. Tao's tonsil paint was like one of the things that they drank. They just had some funny stories. There's a funny story of Davy Crockett going to the Alamo before it was attacked, and he said that his last bar that he visited, he just drank moonshine green off the still, and he said, afterwards, he said, well, I never need to cook food again in my life because everything that goes down there is going to get cooked by the moonshine. But apparently he showed up at the Alamo just like really hammered. So this was just kind of a way of life. I think things were so dangerous. You think of these guys, they were in the Civil War, fearful of their lives. They saw just, the Civil War was like the first modern Civil War, but then there was no modern medicine for them. So this is just terrible stuff. And these guys had seen a lot. And, cattle herding is extraordinarily dangerous. You watch like The Biggest Catch on TV, the guys catching the crab in Alaska. It has nothing on what these cowboys would go through on a daily basis. You get kicked in the chest. That's it, and it might take you 3 weeks to die, It's grim stuff. So they drank a lot.
When you're creating these cocktails, are you creating them? Do you have these, as you said, head note? Do you have the head note first? You create the head note, some interesting factoid about cowboy life, and then you come up with a drink based on that, or do you have a drink kind of in mind and you have to find a factoid to fit it?
A little bit of both, but more often than not, I've got kind of a head note. I kind of developed this whole outline. I'm really outline heavy because it can kind of fit things in, and I want to get enough variety. I don't want all the drinks to look the same, but yet I want to keep the ingredient list edited. But I want to make sure that when I call for somebody to make something, they'll see it again 2 or 3 or 4 times, so that it's not like a waste. So if I call for making some kind of flavored simple syrup, it's going to show up 3 or 4 more times. So it mostly comes from the head notes. And while I was reading stuff, I was just going for the most memorable. I mean, kind of when you do something like this, you have to go through the source material and say to yourself, if I didn't know it, and I watch a lot of cowboy movies and I read enough history, and I think I know about this stuff. If I run into something that I don't know, I'm like, people just don't know this maybe, or I find it interesting. So then I grab it. I try to formulate a drink around it to tell that story. So I'm always looking for stories. Luckily with this one, it has a number of fun. I didn't know how to actually deliver all of the details that I found. So there's just tons of little notes through the whole thing of like things that are so fascinating. I just couldn't help myself because I'm basically like, did you know this? The whole book is like, oh my God, did you know this?
Well, as usual with your books, it is laid out. It is beautiful. The art is great. The pictures are amazing. And just going through the cocktails first, they're not that complicated. Anyone can do these. That's a beautiful thing. The other part that I love always in your books is you have food in the back. I love these recipes. Yeah. Corn doggers, beans, chili steaks, ox eyes, which basically is
the ox eyes.
I'm making it.
It's shakshuka.
Yeah, there you go. I know. I saw that. I'm like, ooh.
It's
Cowboy
great.
stew.
The beans in here are life changing. So I found a number of really old cowboy books, and some, these are the type of recipes that they just tell you what's in it. They don't give you any amounts, like old school, like your grandma's card box, like it has flour, yeast, and salt. You figure it out, So the beans in here are so good that you start to understand that that's their main meal, right? So I think we think of cowboys eating a lot of meat, but that would be like getting high on your own supply, sure. Right? So they ate cattle if they died kind of along the way, but sometimes that meant disease, so they stayed away from it. So they ate beans. Their diet was beans on the road. Yeah. And these ancho beans were so flavor complexity that it almost mimics meat, and it's a phenomenal recipe, that particular one. And then also the dehydrated, there's some fun ones like the dehydrated apple pie, and also a eggless flour cake, which turns out way better than you can imagine. It's super delicious and moist, with no eggs.
Two words, jerky gravy. I'm doing this.
It's so
Oh my
good.
God. That is crazy. Beef jerky gravy. I have to try this.
I was so skeptical. So I go and buy jerky. You know, I'm not a big jerky guy. Every once in a while on a road trip or hiking, I'll get some jerky or something, you know. So I go to the store. I can't even figure out really what jerky to buy. I buy some jerky. And then I start grinding it like in a mortar and pestle. And, you know, how is this going to turn out? This is a terrible idea, right? And then you finish and it's phenomenal. And you're like, why don't more people eat jerky gravy? So that's great with cocktails. Great with whiskey. Oh my God,
so great. So Cowboy Cocktails, 60 recipes inspired by the American West, our friend André Darlington. It is just a really fun book, and it makes you think about our American history and how the West was won, literally. And
with booze.
And living off the land and getting provisions from someplace else, from somebody on the East Coast or the West Coast. And it really turned the tide about the way I think we think about cocktails in a lot of ways in this country, I think. Really cool.
Yeah. I love that book is, it is really a fun one. It was one, you know, sometimes I write these books and, you know, they're pretty entertaining and they're always informative and there's always something fun going on. But this is kind of one that I really did kind of feel close to, like, I felt close to the American story. You know, and I felt like I was kind of doing something unique in cocktail writing too, because just no one's gone into. David Wondrich, of course, has gone in. You know, our great cocktail historian goes into this era for sure. But again, relying on what's in print, it ends up being a lot of East Coast bars that make their way into newspapers. And so this one was kind of driving off into the unknown. So if people are looking for a fun book that's a little on the edge of the cocktail story, but yet fun.
Just a reminder, this is the Booze, Dancing, Entertainment Network. We are on What We Watch When We Drink with André Darlington, our friend, who's come back with 2 new books this year. We are going to dig into the second one, which we could have done like 12 shows, I think, on this book. I think for myself.
As much as a cocktail, a movie, and talk about the book.
It's well, there's a lot going on here. The second book is
a lot going on.
Yeah,
maybe I can remove the cowboy hat.
Get rid of that. Yeah, put on your top hat now.
Right.
The forbidden.
He's just showing off that he has hair.
I know, bastard. Libations inspired by the world of pre-code Hollywood. Now, I should mention that on top of the word forbidden on the top of the book are 3 little letters, TCM, Turner Classic Movies, right? So let maybe talk about the connection between TCM and the book, and then we'll dive deeper. And maybe we do a cocktail first?
Let's do the drink first. Yeah. Let's do the cocktail first, because my drink is bleeding and my ice is melting.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
Yes, quick.
Yes. Ange, what'd you make from this book?
I made the J&H.
The J&H.
Which is the Jekyll and Hyde.
The J&H.
Nice, yes.
Which you know, it looked prettier about 45 minutes ago.
Yeah.
No, that's looking good. Look at the divide.
Yeah, but it's starting to bleed. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's starting to it's like a brain hemorrhage. It's starting to like bleed. You know? But I just like the whole concept, and also it was an excuse to make honey syrup.
Oh yeah,
which is delicious, nice. And I could drink that on its own because that just tastes so good.
What's in that one?
Okay, so it's 2 ounces of Applejack. So I got the good old Laird's Applejack, oldest distillery in the country. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
And they're in New Jersey. In New Jersey, 1 ounce of fresh lemon juice, half an ounce of honey syrup, and 3/4 of an ounce of red wine. So you float the wine. Never did the float on top. That was so cool.
Yeah, it's fun.
So cool. So neat.
It's a little bit like a New York sour. I was thinking that there's or like dark and stormy. When in the moment the Jekyll and Hyde, I knew I was going to do the movie. I was like, I've got to do one of those double colored cocktails. So it's a little bit of a take on like what New York sours do, where you have like a sour underneath, and then either port or wine or something comes from above.
Yeah. Oh, and the wine was a homemade one, so that's good. Not me, a friend.
Oh, wow, impressive.
Nice.
So nice. So a little homemade wine.
I mean, that's really Prohibition era. You got your own homemade
wine.
Right.
I got my own.
Did you have to have a password to get to that wine? Did you have to go like knock on?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he gave me a case. It's just at the basement. I go through the double
Yeah.
doors. I go to
There
the
you
back
go.
shelf. It's
Andre, what'd you make? Or did you have a second one?
I made the Here Kitty
Oh, I
Kitty,
saw that one in there. Yeah.
meow, meow,
which is
meow.
a fun one that's paired
Oh, one
paired with
question, Andre. Is this the
yeah,
J and H or is it the Jekyll and Hyde?
Name?
it's a Jekyll and Hyde, right?
Okay, but you just put J and H just because. I got
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Okay. All right. I got you.
This is for a movie called Footlight Parade, which is all about cats. And actually, everybody thinks that Andrew Lloyd Webber had watched this. It's literally a Broadway show about creating a Broadway show about cats. It's hilarious. It's ridiculous. It's one of the reasons the code came down. We can get into all the code stuff. But it's fun. It's basically I'm playing on Here Kitty Kitty, so it's whiskey and creme de cacao and then creme de menthe. So all the creams, but actually, no cream in it. They're just like the cream of the liqueur in French. So it's a fun golden drink, and it's basically chocolate mint and whiskey, and it's clear. So it turns into
really
this
clear.
Wild,
I can see the
delicious sort of post dinner cocktail.
That's
right?
cool.
It's just really fun. Not the kind of drink that I normally would order or make, but I've really kind of gotten into some of these like clear after dinner drinks that are just really fun.
Neat.
Anyway,
I chose the Javelin, which is based on a Cary Grant movie. This is the
yes,
night. And he's a javelin thrower, Olympic javelin thrower in the book, in the movie. So this is an ounce of blended whiskey, Scotch, Prosecco, cream, 2 scoops of lemon sorbet, 2 dashes of orange bitters, and lemon peel. And mine too has kind of aged here as we've been talking, but it looks great. And I actually did taste it during the process, and the lemon part, the sorbet is just really, that plus a Prosecco really bangs out. It's just so refreshing.
It's kind of like a Scrapino. So in the film, they go to Italy. It was Cary Grant's first role. He plays a cuckold in it. In a totally unlikely story, his wife falls for this older man that's not as good looking as Cary Grant while he's away in the Olympics as a javelin thrower. So it's just this weird setup.
Wait, who's the javelin thrower?
It's
Cary
just
Grant.
Cary Grant's an Olympic javelin thrower.
Sure.
But in 1930s pre-code, because we can tell people a little bit about it in the weird world of pre-code. There's lots of Cary Grant holding his javelin suggestively, and other people holding his javelin suggestively. We're like kind of, it's like pre-Monty Python here, right? Kind of thing, or or if it's like Spaceballs in Italy.
with the pre-code thing, the pre-code is a specific time frame.
Time frame.
So what are the years?
Right. So for this book, for TCM, the years are 1930 to 1934. So if you look it up on Wikipedia, they'll say all kinds of stuff. But the real definition is in 1930 is when the studios agreed to a code, but they did not really enforce it.
And they said
it wasn't enforced, but it was a gray area. In 1934, the code was reconstituted and reorganized and had teeth. And at that point, you do get censorship then until 1968. And there are some movies in this book that were not shown again until 1968. In fact, there's some scenes in some of the movies in here that we didn't see until 2017. That was one of the most recent one where they're always fine. A lot of these movies, because they were censored, they can't find a clean whole copy of them. And they've kind of floated along in the underground, people finding copies and putting them back together. There's been a real effort to save these movies. But many of them were not seen again until 1968. And the rules of the code were stuff like couldn't show interracial marriage or dating, couldn't show premarital sex, couldn't swear, couldn't have nudity, sort of the things that we think of coming into the R rating system later. But then a lot of just cultural stuff, encoding against homosexuality, against female characters taking a strong lead or not being married. A lot of this cultural stuff. So the reason why there's sort of this rediscovery of pre-code is because I think a lot of Americans don't know that there was a code and that this code was pretty heavy-handed from 1934 until 1968. actually, so just in Hollywood history, Hitchcock really started breaking it open with Psycho, was sort of like the knock on the door of the code. But he got that through. So really up until the 60s, I think that when people watch Pre-Code, and if you watch a number of them, you sort of realize, we didn't see this again really till the 70s. You think of something like Taxi Driver coming along. That's a pre-code with all the violence and the nudity and, everything that's in that. So the 1930 to 1934 is really this special era. Not only is it special because it was censored, but this was also when the studios were just figuring it out and all of the genres were born. So horror is born here. Westerns are born here. The Westerns were in the 20s too, but I mean, things really get genrefied. You have horror films, you have rom-coms, the musical really starts in this. So in this book, you have a lot of firsts, a lot of the firsts or most important, or the ones that told the studios like, oh, musicals work. We're going to do more of them. And the other thing that's fun about this book is we sort of all know the golden age, And so we know somebody like Frank Capra, but in this book, these are his first movies, and you sort of like, you go back and it's really this cradle where you get to see these directors and actors and actresses kind of like getting their start. And you're like, oh, I never knew they did this movie, this crazy movie in the 30s, So it's really wonderful, magical time in cinema. Just real quick to add, the other major point of this is, sound really comes out 28, 29. When sound comes out, all the studios panicked because now we had to have dialogue, and it had to be good dialogue. And it flushed a lot of the older actors and actresses out who had come from vaudeville and were in silent film, and brought in a whole era of sound actors and actresses. But this is also when Faulkner comes to Hollywood, Anita Loos comes to Hollywood, Ursula Parrott comes to Hollywood, Ben Hecht is there, as sort of, he's been called the Shakespeare of LA. So you get these major, F. Scott Fitzgerald is there. You get these major writers kind of either behind or working on these scripts because the scripts need to be so much better now that there's sound. So you get this incredible convergence of not a lot of censorship. The studios are going crazy because it's the onset of the Depression, and they're trying to get people into the box office. And the way you do it is to have really extreme films. So it's just this crazy 1930 to 1934 pre-code, and all the movies. We know some of them, right? We know
King Kong.
King Kong, right? That's the
Yep.
quick and easy one. It happened one night.
Right.
Is another big one. So we know some of the pre-codes, but I feel like people don't know know it as like a time period and kind of know. Also, we know Dinner at 8, Grand Hotel. There's some that have made it out of this
I think it's
era.
interesting.
So it's not genre.
Go ahead, Andrew.
So it's not genre specific. It's just a time frame.
Correct. Not so right. So people say, "Oh, pre-code is like noir. Noir is a genre. We can argue over when it begins and ends." Pre-code is really just talking about 1930 to 1934, all genres. And basically, what it's meaning is, this is a time when the studios were kind of really figuring it out, but also really going for it in terms of controversial material.
I think your point, though, before that, it's a demarcation in movie making when you get sound and the technological advancements all at once.
Yeah, like stop motion animation for King Kong,
That's
Right.
Yeah. So you've got this,
and lighting.
Editing is huge. And you
get
get this huge change all of a sudden where like dialogue and words are important. It's like everything before that's prehistoric, right? Totally prehistoric.
Yep.
This is a major change. And you're right. This little period here is people, movie makers, studios trying to figure out what sells and how are we going to do that. It's a really important time. This is the movies we see today don't happen, right? And because of this era is so critical. Of course, when color comes in and other technological improvements later on, but this is really a huge change in entertainment in America, in the world, but mostly in America. Boy, there's
So you're absolutely right. So I did a book with TCM before called Movie Night Menus. I did it in 2016. And what was funny was, and they kind of allowed us to do, is kind of like the years where I think we went up to like Moonstruck in the late 80s, so it wasn't a pre-code book by any means, but my obsession with pre-code sort of began then. I put Grand Hotel in there. I think My Man Godfrey might be in there. I love the movie Female. I could have written a pre-code book then, and I was like, oh no, I got to start moving on from this era, and I became just obsessed with the movies of this time because they're so intense, they're so fascinating, the scripts are so good, the acting is so good. But it's writing this book was really kind of a terrifying one because I do these deep dives into this material. And pre-code, as you said, kind of in the beginning of when we started talking about this, it goes on forever. You can't, if you look up just like the best movies of 1930, you're going to get a list and it scrolls. And, it's so funny because I've been doing interviews for this book and people are like, did you watch all those movies? I'm like, yeah, I watched all the movies like 2 and 3 times, right? Taking notes, trying to figure out which ones are going to go in and which ones aren't going to go in. It goes on forever. And I'm still watching pre-code. And when I die, I can still be watching pre-code. That's how many movies they were making and how much was going on in this era.
How long did it take to make this book? How long have you been working on it?
Not as long as as it should have, but it was over a year. But, this is one of those crazy things where, my partner is a workaholic. And when I get these book deals, I'm basically like, see you when this book is done. This one was at least fun because we could watch the movies together and we really got into, there were so many that we had seen. So many of these movies are fascinating because we've seen clips of them, but you don't realize you've seen clips of them, but they've kind of made their way into the American psyche because they're such huge. Yeah. So there's a lot of those. You're like, oh, this is from that movie. Oh, okay. But yeah, this was a scary one because, people have PhDs in pre-code basically. So, I'm out there as this cocktail writer and I've written, about movies before, but writing about The Big Lebowski and watching it 17 times or whatever is different than getting your head around the early 1930s when you have a lot going on. So I came again to this from cocktail point of view. Fascinating time in cocktails, right? It's Prohibition when pre-code starts, and then it ends, and we get probably the great drinking movie of all time, The Thin Man. So from cocktail world, we all know The Thin Man is probably the greatest drinking movie of all time, and then I go from The Thin Man backwards to The Divorcee in 1930 and catch the movies along the way. I did it in chronological order going the other way, but you know what I mean? Like, we know the one movie out of this time that has the great drinking in it. And then coming to it from like an artistic point of view and having to learn all this to like really give a good grasp on the era and all the characters. And people get into pre-code because it's so fun to just watch the actors and actresses mix it up. They were doing like 16 movies a year, each of these actors and actresses, so they show up on different movie houses and different scripts and different directors. And just is like, again, when they're figuring out how this whole star system is sort of going to go in the talkie era. Anyway, it was a giant undertaking. And really, when I do a book like this, I basically am like fidelity to the artistic vision of what these movies were. And then I just get the hell out of the way, I want to sell this movie. So this was like, I'm going to sell these movies in head notes so people want to watch them. And I'm just getting out of the way because the material I think is so important.
Talk about TCM for a minute. So you've worked with them before. They are a major repository of classic movies in this country. And they have, from the beginning, that was their goal, one of their goals was to be a place that these movies can live forever. Right. How much did you rely on them or on the cable channel or streaming to find these movies? Are they all available? Are they easily found? Are they all on YouTube?
I wish I could say yes, but no. There's a little bit of hunting and pecking. I mean, I think that people that are really into pre-code, when I talk to them, a lot of them have picked this stuff up on DVD or downloaded it and own it, which is great too, because these movies are worth owning, as long as it's not expensive. Quite a few of them are available pretty easily. And then some of them are a bit of a hunt, but TCM tends to show those. So at some point you can kind of get a TCM schedule and you'll be able to watch these. And I'm hoping that with this book coming out, that's becomes more true. TCM is acutely aware that pre-code is hot. When they do their TCM festivals, the pre-code things sell out. So one of the reasons to do this book, which was so awesome, is that TCM wanted to do this book. The publisher approached me to do it, which was so exciting that pre-code has gotten popular enough that it could warrant a book like this. It just came out this month and it's on May 6th, and it's doing great and people are really excited and it's getting big press and it's really fun to see. So they know. So I think these are going to become, and of course TCM did a great job of packaging some of these pre-codes for a number of years now. They've been packaging them. If you go out to Amazon, you can buy DVDs of them. I hate to say, that people need to maybe buy a DVD if they're really into it, but I think that people are into film kind of know that anyway for a lot of stuff. But for the general public, some of them might be hard to find. Although when you start hunting for it, there's so many theaters and like art theaters or universities are playing these movies now. I think because they're so relevant to our time. And I think one of the takeaways that I took from this book is that the time 1930 to 1934, the economy has collapsed. Nobody has any answers. Hoover's on his way out. FDR is on his way in. There's a lot of tension, a lot of extreme turmoil in culturally, with religion, with sex, with gender roles, with everything in his time. And what's so fascinating, I think why this era really hits a nerve with us and why it's popular again is because it's a time so much like our own. We had fascism on one side, communism on the other, everyone's fighting. And these movies, my message to, about this book ultimately is one of hope and fun, because these movies are fun to escape to, but also they really show us that we've made it through times like this, and we made it through looking great on great sets, wearing great clothes with a cocktail in our hand. It's in these times, it was so interesting when this came out. I was thinking this is going to come out during an election year. Nerves are raw and high, no matter what you think or where you're at on the spectrum. And this book really is a great book for that, because you can go back and watch these movies, and they're wonderful scripts. So that you get, if you're a movie buff and you're missing character development. Anyone character development, you're going to get screenplays that have great character development, but you're also going to get great sets and all this fun, all these fun, and the humor and the sexiness of it all, but also really an ultimate message in so many of them is that it's okay and you're going to make it.
I think you're right. I mean, you're right. We're in the middle of growing problem of war in Germany and in Western Europe, and fascism is rising, and in America you've got people on breadlines, and you need to escape, and the movies become an escape, right? Radio and
are you talking about then or now?
Both, completely both. That's what Andre's point is, and we are in the same world right now.
It's crazy. So I knew enough about King Kong. Let's just take King Kong for instance. King Kong came out on the weekend that FDR had to declare a bank holiday so that there weren't a run on the banks and America didn't collapse. And while everyone was basically like, Monday morning, I'm going to get up and try and take my money out and there won't be any money. That weekend, they all took what money they did have and went and watched King Kong. The whole country. This is very American, or just like human nature,
just
right?
Star Wars.
I'm not going to eat on Monday, but I need to see this new monkey movie.
That's right.
And in the movie, King Kong is this stand-in for cultural paranoia about a number of things, but he attacks the heart of Manhattan right outside the theaters. in New York. He attached the picture that I have in the book is King Kong attacking the L, the 6th Avenue L. So, and audiences loved this because it really was like, yeah, the world is falling apart, but somehow this movie helps us make sense of it.
That's what it is. It's all escapism, right? Yeah, that's right.
Right.
You know, normally when I get one of your books, I will take Post-it notes and I will tag all the pages that I want to make that cocktail or that recipe. This book is totally not that book. I tagged every page I want to watch the movie of. And I have one that I did my cocktail with, but I want to see all these. I want to see all these movies. I am just some of them I know, some of them I don't know, and
I love it. That is exactly what I was hoping for this book. You know, when they gave me this book to do, I just want people to watch them.
And you see, well, a younger generation may not know all these wonderful actors and actresses' names that we would know.
Yeah,
that are Cary Grant, Marlene Dietrich, Joan Blondell. There's so many names, and this is like you said, this is their minor league debut, right? Before they hit,
or the movies that made them, kind of, you know, some of these movies were popular enough that that's what made them.
And then they become really big stars in the 40s and 50s, right?
Yeah.
It's really amazing to see these names doing things that you may not think of them as doing. You know, correct, right? This is we are pushing taboo and the mores of America at the time, and that it's on a big screen. People are, wow, Cary Grant's doing that. That is amazing. He's not the same guy from the 1960s here, by far.
No. Yeah, his movies with Mae West, where, you know, they're just wild.
It's really wild. So there's a lot of fun stuff, I think, to be seen watching these old movies and some of these stars to be, and what Hollywood's doing at the time. And as you said, as a backdrop to what's happening in America. So let's talk cocktails, because this is a really a big moment in American cocktail evolution. All of a sudden, you have drinking on screen. That is a big deal,
which was technically not allowed. So in the code, they expressly forbade what they called smart drinking, which was basically like, let's show people, kind of like eventually we forbade like good-looking people smoking while they played tennis, right? You just can't do it. So it was the same with the drinking. And yet, movie after movie, it is wild to think that liquor was illegal, and movie after movie, they're just so boozy right from the beginning. And often the scripts were written in such a way that's basically like, woman meets man, they have a tryst, nothing really works out. She gets upset and goes to Europe, but first the cruise, and the entire cruise you could drink. Right? It was so often you'll be like, we're in a speakeasy, maybe somebody got pregnant, definitely somebody's feelings got hurt. Let's go drink. And it would be like Cuba, on an airplane, in a train, you know, on a boat. So there's so many excuses where they just immediately go to Europe. And now some of this is escapism, right? You want to show Americans that can't afford anything. Europe, you know, there's so many, like, this is when Americans fall in love with Paris, they fall in love with Rome. There's a great movie, I think it's Strangers May Kiss, where they go to Mexico and, you know, they're drinking with sombreros on. Probably the first time half of middle America saw sombreros. I mean, it's just fun stuff, but it's so much of it is an excuse to drink.
Well, and I think that you mentioned all these modes of transportation. Most people people in America don't have money. They can't go anywhere. They don't own a car yet. Yep. They stay in their little place in Brooklyn or wherever. Yep. But look at that famous person, that actor is taking a steamship across the ocean, or an airplane, or a train across the country. Yeah, this is a more escapism for America to see how life could be in a better time. And cocktails are part of that, because most people probably weren't drinking in that kind of fancy way. Not middle America, but average Americans, I assume.
Yeah, you're absolutely drinking beer. Right. I mean, I think it was, there a lot of people were drinking beer. The rural situation again always gets more clouded because you don't really know. The newspapers don't have the story. The news, we kind of know what happened in big cities. Big cities had these big speakeasies. Small towns outside of big cities did really well. They had speakeasies too, so everybody would drive out of town and go to sort of like a country speakeasy. But certainly there was, like in New York, there's lots of speakeasies in like Greenwich Village. We know this because the moment that Prohibition ended, these speakeasies were just like, they hung a shingle out the next week and were like, just
come on in.
I don't know how this bar got here.
We did it overnight.
I mean, it was such an open secret by the end, but you're absolutely right. There's a lot of mobility, a lot of showing of the upper class mobility. What's fascinating for me as a cocktailer is that we read books from the 1930s like it's so long ago. And we think of Prohibition of like so long ago. You can go and watch the movies that were made during Prohibition, and they will show you drinking scenes, and they'll show you what was happening. And I find that so fascinating. And, I hadn't done it as deliberately as I did it for this book. I can tell you basically all the different major cocktail scenes from 1930 to 1934. And let me tell you, it's just absolutely fascinating how sophisticated it is. I think there's in cocktail lore, it's always like, well, Prohibition drinks are really citrus heavy because the liquor was all crap and we had to cover the flavor, And you're like, not really. For the upper class, for somebody in New York with, there was a person of even modest means, you could get your hands on good liquor. It was coming in through Canada. It was coming from the Midwest. So some of that wasn't true. But what's also fascinating in these movies, because they wanted to show people drinking, we can go to Paris and see what they were making there too. Or London. So it's a really fun time in cocktails. So real quick, when I started out doing this, I started out as a journalist and I wrote about other people's drinks. And then it was basically when I did Gotham City Cocktails, DC Comics wanted original cocktails for those drinks. And I thought, why the hell not? I've owned a bar and restaurant. I've been writing about people's drinks for, at that point, almost 20 years, probably 15, 17 years. So I switched over in that book. And so many of my books now are originals because I didn't need to reprint the classics from the Prohibition era. I didn't want to pair the Prohibition drinks we already know with these movies. I wanted to make it more interesting. These are period ingredients. But you can go and buy the Savoy cocktail book. It's still one of the greatest cocktail books of all time. You can go buy it. You can make the drinks out of there. So I didn't want to rehash that again. I also could have carved this, and these books also already exist where so many actors and actresses have cocktails named after them. I give you some of them. I put some of them in the back. If you want to have a Charlie Chaplin, you can just Google that, So I keep evolving because, everything's available online. We can Google everything. We can get these books. We know what people were drinking. So I wanted to create basically period drinks. This happens to be my favorite era of drinks. The drinks tend to be, if you think of like we're in a Baroque age now where you have 8 ingredients and things have been rotovapped and there's all kinds of ingredients you've never heard of. That's an arms race that the bars do. For me, Prohibition drinks are sort of like Yo-Yo Ma playing unaccompanied Bach. There's going to be 4 ingredients, probably 3. Don't F it up because there's nowhere to hide. But I like those drinks. I like that because you can make a drink completely different by just, and if you look at the Savoy cocktail book, those drinks, some of them are very diverse. And then some of them for pages, it'll be like, da 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 da. Have you changed your bitters? You changed your liqueur. You changed your this. Otherwise, it's the same damn drink, but something really important changes and it becomes a different time of day. It becomes a drink for a different type of occasion.
It's
completely.
Nuance.
So yeah, it's this nuance in it. So I really tried with this book to show people like, this is what the Prohibition is about, but I really wanted to hang my hat on interesting scenes, interesting characters for the book. Because again, I'm trying to sell these movies as an experience. I hope that people buy this book and they see the cocktail and they're like, I want to drink that cocktail. Let's watch the movie. And then there's a real tie-in flavor-wise or time-wise to it that really brings the movie alive. And that's what, I couldn't have done this at another point in my career for sure. This couldn't have been my second book. This had to be book 12, basically book 12 decades and decades in, where I'm like, I know that this is going to be a raspberry syrup in this drink, because they're probably drinking Clover Clubs in that movie. You can't quite tell what they're doing, but I'm like, they're probably drinking Clover Clubs. So I'm going to do a raspberry syrup drink because that was really popular at the time, et cetera, et cetera.
Do we know if on set, in scene, are they really drinking alcohol back then? Do we know that?
I think so. I think mostly so. I think it was very wet. You can definitely tell. It's interesting because there's some of the movies where they sort of serve a drink. Now, we have to keep in mind these drinks are small. So even when they're doing a martini, we can be at like 1.5 ounces for these martinis. Their glasses are very small. But there's definitely movies where they just kind of all like clink and knock it back and no one has any reaction at all. And you're like, it's got to be water, And then there's definitely scenes where they sort of drink it and you're like, you could watch a couple of them being like, whoa.
It's funny.
In the movie, because they didn't have time to cut this out. And you're like, yeah, somebody just put some hooch in there. I mean, I think officially they weren't, allowed to have drinks on set, but we know that it was so wet and so many of these actors and actresses had a pretty intense relationship with alcohol.
We grew up. We all grew up in an era of television and movie where the cliche was whoever Magnum PI, Rockford is drinking something dark, and it's supposed to be whiskey, but really it's like iced tea with some food coloring in it, right?
Right.
And you would never drink
sure.
because this is actually postcode, right? And you probably could not legally do that. There was lawyers involved, starting to become lawyers involved, and you had to be careful. But then, we could be a little bit. We're already skirting the law in a lot of places here. Why can't we drink on the set?
I mean, there's definitely it's shocks. So it's the level of talent in these movies shocked me, right? Because
it's amazing.
Because the scripts often weren't done; they weren't finished. And then what scripts they had, they memorized. Like, I mean, they were literally doing 16 movies a year, some of them, or more.
It was a machine.
It's wild how many. It would go from 1 month to the next, doing the next script. So the level of talent, the level of memorization, but also then there really was an expectation. If you think of somebody like Gable and Crawford together, or Gable and Harlow, who have these incredible on-screen chemistry. So much of it seems ad-libbed, and it's like, but there's also, we're pretty sure that Harlow was often either hungover or drunk, right?
My kind of girl.
And yet, her comedic timing, her lines, everything just seems so natural. And you just think that some of these folks were just these wild naturals, and they walked onto screen and they didn't change a thing. They just walked onto that screen and just started being themselves. And there we go. That's the movie, we know, for instance, like somebody like Crawford, nothing came easy. She was extremely calculating. She required certain lighting. She had her own lighting people after she got famous. She would show herself from certain angles, and there was a lot of that. She was very studied. And then some of them, you watch their scenes and you're like, pretty sure they just turned around and made that quip and walked out off the scene, So yeah, I mean, there was a lot of drinking in Hollywood. There always has been. I think the stress of this era, the amount of time, we think of today like, oh, an actor or actress has a good, sometimes 4 or 5 year run and then they're too old or whatever. I mean, Hollywood was dumping people faster than that back then. You had a bad movie, you're out. You got it. And so I think there was just this level of just racehorse. Next day could be your last day in Hollywood. And so you partied all the time, almost like kind of a wartime mentality out there. At least that's what, doing the research kind of made me believe that these people were really focused. Before we run out of time, I don't know how much time we have left. I did bring a couple special guests.
We like guests.
So I love pre-code anyway. And I don't collect a lot of barware because it can get out of hand really quickly and very expensive very quickly. I do collect 1930s barware anyway. I have some fun items. I'll show some of the most fun items. One is a chrome, and so chrome is the name of the game in the 1930s. Chrome was inexpensive. People had it at home. People had it on their cars. This is chrome. Bakelite also comes in the 1930s. So we get some interesting stuff. The fun thing about this particular shaker.
Wait, that's a shaker?
This is a shaker.
It looks like an espresso pot.
It's got a lid, and then you twist off the front.
Yeah.
So this would be your cocktail shaker. You notice kind of like its 30s lines. It's got that bullet kind of
very
building
cool.
thing going on.
Got a little deco going on.
The fun thing about this particular shaker.
Oh, it's got a music box.
Oh my God, how cool!
Is that it plays Irving Berlin's "How Dry I Am."
Oh my God, that's awesome.
Fantastic.
So if you set it down, it stops, and then as you were shaking it for your guests,
that's
would
tremendous.
Sing,
hey, here's the question: have you actually used it to make a drink?
I have, yeah.
Is it? Does it leak? Does it hold pretty well?
It doesn't actually. No, this one doesn't. This one doesn't.
Pretty good.
That is very cool.
Well, you know how they are usually. A lot of those,
Boston,
unless you have a Boston shaker, a lot of them leak.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, but I love the, and some of this 30s stuff is fairly inexpensive still. If you go out onto like Etsy,
not anymore.
You can get some of the big production chrome stuff. Yeah, I know it's going to turn into a thing. So my other real piece de resistance in my 1930s collection is an actual false teapot from a Prohibition era bar. It was probably used more to transport. So on the outside, we sort of have a brushed bronze. You can start to tell that things are not all that they seem from the bottom. It opens up, so it's metal on the outside. It opens up, and inside is your hidden liquor flask.
Oh, that's so cool.
And the trick was that you could remove the bottom. Yeah, if I can get it off. So this would have been used in a speakeasy. I gotta make sure my top is lined up correctly. So there's a groove here where this will then just drop out.
Oh,
and
look
at
that.
Bottle of booze inside
awesome.
Your speakeasy teapot.
It's a teetotaler.
Nice.
It's a teetotaler. So when you see in the old movies, there's a couple scenes in the films in here where they drink out of teacups. And actually, there's a bar in New York that you can still drink out of a teacup. So you'd go into a speakeasy, and you'd basically get your pot of booze and go sit at your table like you're very nice, having tea with your mom.
Yeah. It's so funny.
So is that like working from home when you put whiskey in your mug?
Yes,
and
exactly.
I'm just drinking coffee.
Right. It's exactly right.
I love
can't say it.
Whole.
When you were rated, it was like, it's just tea.
That whole, it comes before that, during the Gilded Age, where you've got everything's fancy, big houses, mansions, and fancy china and fancy plates and fancy everything, including barware, cups, glasses, right?
Yes.
And it kind of just pushes forward through Prohibition and into some really interesting things in bars, which, as you're a barkeeper in Los Angeles, there's still a world of people out there collecting that stuff, looking for that stuff, right? And there's new stuff being made all the time. That's the really fun part of cocktails, is the vessels that everything gets either mixed with or gets poured into, right? That's the fun stuff.
It's fun, and it's funny that there's so many 1930s cocktails and cocktail things, and it's because that whole scene went at home. So it's sort of like, when weed was not legal in the United States, but you could buy a pipe on any corner. This is kind of the same thing. You could go into a department store and buy a full cocktail set, but of course it wasn't for alcohol because that was illegal. But there's so much of it, and then we had this huge boom right after Prohibition. It goes into sort of mid-century. It becomes mid-century modern. These 30s things that we saw on TV, we saw in these movies, we now want at home, and like mass. They started producing it in mass for the American, rising middle class. Of the post-war, the war years and the post-war years. So this type of shaker, in this shape, goes up through the 60s. In fact, I have what's called a moon shaker that has the rounded handle on it. And it's from the 1930s. But when you watch The Graduate and Dustin Hoffman goes over to Mrs. Robinson's house and she tries to seduce him by giving him a drink that 1930s moonshaker is on the bar behind her. So this stuff, like, it starts in pre-code, I tell you, and continues on.
It's the birthplace of so much in the cocktail era that we live in today. It really is.
Yeah.
And movie for entertainment as well. TCM, Forbidden Cocktails, libations inspired by the world of pre-code Hollywood by André Darlington. André, this was so fun. This book is, both books are great. I should get the other one too. Cowboy Cocktails. These were so fun. I highly recommend them to anyone interested in cocktails or cowboy culture or old movie culture. These are just really, really fun books. We wish you a lot of luck with them, and we can't thank you enough for.
Thanks so much for having me on. You guys are the perfect people to do both books, really, but really the Forbidden Cocktails with.
Oh my gosh!
Movies. And again, my wish is just that people, see these films. They're so wonderful, and I think TCM will run a number of them this year. So if you pick up the book, which book is available anywhere books are sold, but if you pick up a book, I think if you go out to TCM website, you can start to get a schedule for the fun pre-codes.
These movies are not long; they are short. They are like an hour.
Most of them are maybe,
right?
Yeah,
and so you can knock out a bunch of
commitment. Although you feeling like you read a.
It's right. You can stream.
There are kinds of movies.
Stream like 14 or binge like 14 episodes of like Friends. You can just watch like 5 of these things tonight easily, right? Totally.
Exactly.
André, thank you. We love you. We love you coming on, and this was so fun. And by the way,
so
this cocktail, whatever the heck it was called, the Javelin, so good. The lemon. I'm a lemon nerd. This was just like lemon heaven. Lemon heaven.
Same with the Jekyll and Hyde. Very good. Very tart.
I love it.
Very tart.
Yeah.
A lot of pucker.
I love it.
Yeah. Especially with the red wine, it gives that nice little tannin pucker.
Yep.
Nice. Your homemade prohibition wine.
Yes, that's right.
What's that?
With your homemade wine.
What was that? Yes,
right.
exactly.
Right. Very prohibition era.
Well, thank you guys for having me.
Thank you, André.
Always a pleasure.
Booze Dancing Entertainment Network. What we watch when we drink. This is going to be on a podcast before you know it, and you can just download it and listen on your way to a speakeasy one day, or out to the ranch.
That's right.
Out to the ranch to throw cow chips or something.
Or break a couple of Broncos.
Break a couple Broncos.
Whatever.
That's right. That's right. André, again, thank you. We will see you guys real soon on another cocktail or whiskey Wednesday. Ange, why don't you take us out?
Cheers, folks.
Cheers.
If you enjoy this show, please subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, Audible, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. You can also find us on boozdancing.com, and if you have any questions, comments, show or drink suggestions, email us at boozdancing@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you.